Today we'll be taking a look at No Man's Sky on the PS4 and the Potato Masher. If you don't know, the Potato Masher is a $375 PC custom built in 2014 and designed to compete with the PS4 for the rest of its life cycle. The goal is not to pick on consoles, but to show that PC gaming can be just as good or better for the same money. If you'd like to support this project on Patreon, the link is on screen. I'm currently saving as much Patreon money as possible in case the PS4 Neo releases this fall and is significantly different from the PS4, warranting a possible upgrade or different comparison build. There's more info in the description, so let's get to it. First, apologies if the sound isn't quite as good as normal. I'm traveling this week and I didn't want to wait to make the video because a lot of you guys have been asking for it, so I'm editing this video on a laptop in my childhood house actually right now, and I'm using a portable mic, so not my ideal setup, but hopefully it is acceptable. I've never reviewed a procedurally generated game before, and as such, there are some important things you need to keep in mind when I'm sharing my opinion and analysis of No Man's Sky. I can't compare identical situations or areas of the game, because during my recording and testing, the PS4 and PC copies of the game were never in the same place, or likely even in the same section of the galaxy. Even similar looking worlds can have different weather patterns, sunlight, and color schemes. As a result of this, which platform is better looking is going to be much more subjective than usual. I'm not concerned because I think in this case it's much more important to talk about how the game runs on each individual platform. There are many varied and polarizing opinions about No Man's Sky on the internet. As always, you should take my results and experience with a few grains of salt because I'm not using the same hardware as you, and my definition of acceptable or exceptional gameplay likely differs from yours. Still, at very high settings in 1080p, I was initially able to maintain an easy 30 FPS with occasional stutters. This stuttering is widely reported by many people online. I disabled the game's built-in 30 FPS frame rate limiter and used Rivatuner, and the stuttering disappeared. So if you're having the same issue, it's worth a try. There's a link to Rivatuner in the video description. The PS4 also runs at 1080p and 30 FPS, but the frame rate frequently drops when you're landing or taking off in a ship. As reported by Digital Foundry, flying over the procedurally generated landscapes makes the PS4 drop into the low 20s or even the teens at times. It's very noticeable, and I think I know why it happens. You can see here that the Masher's CPU usage is very high in the same scenario, which makes sense. The Masher also drops into the high 20s on occasion because the CPU is almost completely maxed out. The terrain is being streamed in at high speed, as is common with an open world game, and that's usually very taxing on the CPU. The PS4 has a much weaker CPU than the Masher, and it struggles to keep up in a similar situation. So if the i5-750 in the Masher was running at stock speeds, it would likely have more problems than it does, which is one of the major reasons why I overclocked it when I did the build. As it is, I'd have a hard time saying the game runs well on either platform, but on the Masher it's at least acceptable. As far as visuals are concerned, both platforms look fairly similar. None of the built-in anti-aliasing options are extremely effective, so there's visible aliasing pretty much all of the time. Despite setting the textures to their highest setting, the game's voxel rendering tech leaves many surfaces looking blurry, as if the anisotropic filtering was on a low setting. It's not uncommon for the PS4 or Xbox One to have low anisotropic filtering, but on modern PCs that setting rarely costs more than 1 FPS on its highest setting, so most people just leave it up all the time. But on No Man's Sky, even at 16x, it doesn't appear to be very effective. Shadows, God rays, and post-processing effects can look beautiful or bland depending on where you are. On both platforms you'll see quite a bit of pop-in and rendering artifacts as you fly over a planet's surface. The pop-in is even worse in space, where asteroids will appear very quickly in the foreground. Since this is a procedurally generated game, most of the worlds I visited were barren or otherwise dull and lifeless. This is probably very accurate and true to how the universe actually is, but this is a game, and exceptionally good-looking planets were few and far between. Both the Masher and the PS4 run worse on the better-looking planets, which I think is due to the additional foliage and water reflections that are on those planets, but again, it's hard to know exactly for sure, but that's the only consistent thing I saw that seemed to affect performance more than normal. Reflections and ambient occlusion appear to be very slightly better on the Masher, but again, it's hard to find a situation where I can provide a direct comparison, so I may not be correct. There's some additional weirdness on the PC version of the game. You have to restart the game to apply any graphics settings, even if it's a simple resolution change. The Quit to Desktop option is buried in the Options menu, and when you make a selection, you have to hold down the mouse button while the animated cursor completes a short visual. This is totally unnecessary. Alt-tabbing doesn't allow many people back into the game after they jump out to Windows, although Hello Games has a work-in-progress patch that addresses this. They also recommend you only install it if you really need it. To each their own, but I don't mess with early access patches or experimental drivers unless it's a dire situation. When you do have to restart the game to apply a setting, you'll have to sit through a very long initial load. It's not quite as bad as Grand Theft Auto 5, but both platforms have to endure this, and it's aggravating. On the PS4, accurately aiming your mining tool is pretty difficult because there doesn't appear to be any auto-aim like most console games have. This is a situation where a mouse and keyboard makes controlling the game significantly easier. Instead of clicking through the available options like most PS4 games offer in their menus, actually every PS4 game I can think of, in No Man's Sky you use a virtual cursor, like a mouse, but you're doing it with a controller. There's no good reason to do this. Lastly, I've heard many PS4 owners report the game crashing on their systems. I didn't have this issue on my PS4, but I may have just gotten lucky. Enough people have reported it that I think it's worth mentioning. Overall, No Man's Sky runs pretty well on the Masher with slight system slowdown during takeoff or landing. On the PS4, the game looks largely the same as the Masher from what I can tell. If there are differences, they're slight and don't take away from the overall experience. The framerate slowdown is much more significant and does detract from the experience in my opinion, but you should watch this video and Digital Foundry's analysis and judge for yourself. The Masher's GTX 760 is capable of 60 FPS in No Man's Sky, but as is the case with plenty of open world games, the limiting factor is the CPU. At 1080p and medium settings, the Masher has no trouble with 60 FPS during many outer space sections, but it quickly drops back near 30 when you're in more complex environments. I would rather run at a fairly consistent locked 30 FPS than allow the frame rate to fluctuate this much, as the experience isn't very smooth. At 1440p and very high settings, the Masher runs the game fine in space, but drops to a PS4-like 20 FPS during fast blasts over a planet's landscape. At low settings, the frame rate is more steady, still with occasional drops. It's about as playable as it is at 1080p and very high settings. The game is more limited by the CPU than the GPU, which is why there isn't as large of a difference between the two resolutions as you might expect. The aliasing is a bit better and the voxel graphics are a bit sharper, but the other issues are still there. It's improved, but it's not fixed. No Man's Sky is obviously not going to be a game that works for everyone. If you want to get lost and find joy in exploration and gradual progression, you might really enjoy the game, and tons of people online seem to. If you prefer more structured narrative or more to do, you will probably get bored after a few hours. As it stands, I wouldn't purchase the game right now until more issues have been worked out. It feels like an early access game more than a finished release. If you think the gameplay is right up your alley and you want to give it a shot, I recommend buying on Steam so you can get a refund if it doesn't run well, or renting a PS4 copy if that option is available where you live. The Masher runs the game better than the PS4, but neither platform hits it out of the park. A win for the Masher, but hardly a runaway victory. If you enjoyed this video, check out the original build video or any of the other Potato Masher videos linked on screen. This project was started by the Casual Shenanigans Gaming Podcast, so click the link to check us out. You can support this channel and the Potato Masher project by tossing me a few bucks on Patreon. It helps me test new games quicker and better, and prepare for the PS4 Neo. Thank you for your support, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.